my name is Beck and welcome to a Q&A. I filmed a video about this asking for questions. I uploaded that video in March and then coronavirus hit and I wasn't really sure how to run the giveaway section, but I think I'm just going to draw a winner anyway. And then if there are problems with like shipping and stuff, then we can figure that out. Maybe I can buy something online for their local store or something. I don't know yet, but I will put the giveaway winner pinned in the comments of this video and then also my initial announcement video so that that person can get in touch with me. So if you are the winner, please do send me a direct message on Twitter or Instagram. Now let's get into the questions. I was asked 40 questions and you'll notice that we're in a different location right now because I did not want to set this up in front of the bookshelf, which is in the other room. I'm at my desk. I've put together an Excel spreadsheet. I feel very organized of all of the questions. And so I've only read these once when I was copy and pasting them all in. So I have not gone through and I've not thought of answers ahead of time. So let's go into all the questions now and see what my answers are. So the first question is, what is one book you wish you could reread for the first time? I am going to try not to pick like The Name of the Wind or The Art of Racing in the Rain or Harry Potter or anything like that. Maybe Percy Jackson, because I did a video about all of the books that made up my childhood recently and then I forgot to include Percy Jackson. And I just feel like I robbed myself because that was one of the series that I adored when I was a kid because I borrowed it from my school library. I've now bought a ton of his books and I own them myself. So I love Rick Riordan as an author and I think it's appropriate because, I mean, I don't know when I'm posting this video, but as I'm filming it, the announcement for the live action Disney Plus Percy Jackson reboot is going ahead. So we're getting a season per book, which is incredible and I'm so excited. So I hope they do it justice. Question number 2 is, what are your top 10 favorite fantasy books / series? So this is a fairly in-depth answer that I'm going to have to give. So I might just do a separate video or something that is like either tier ranking or whether it's just talking about my favorite fantasy books. I might do something of that nature because it doesn't specify adult or young adult. So I think I could do a mix of both. So I might park that question and then do it in a future video. So thank you for the video idea. The next question is, what is your favorite bookish event that you've been to? And there have been quite a couple. Like I went to all of the book launches for J. Christoph's Nevernight series. So Nevernight, God's Grave and Dark Dawn. Another bookish event that was part of like a Comic-Con kind of event was when Brandon Sanderson came to Sydney several years ago and I got to hear him talk on a panel. And because he lectures often, he's very good at public speaking and talking to a panel, and he's written a lot of stuff so he knows his own writing process now. So it was really informative and imagination inducing to go and see him actually talk to an audience like that, especially because he's one of my favorite authors. Something that was a little bit more low-key was when I went to a Reading Matters conference, and that was like a young adult tiered conference. It was a local Melbourne event in Australia, so it's probably got nothing on like Yalc or any of those other huge bookish events in the US or UK. So Jennifer Niven was there and she was lovely and her publicist introduced me to her, and I'd read All the Bright Places by her and I enjoyed it. It made me emotional, but I had a bit of an issue with the fact that it romanticized or seemed to romanticize mental illness. But hearing Jennifer Niven talk about it and the fact that it was based on somebody she once knew and loved, I think she's romanticizing the memory of them and putting that in a book rather than romanticizing the mental illness aspect of it. So I could see the separation there when I talked to her in person and I saw her talk to an audience in person. So it was an interesting twist on what I thought I knew and the assumptions I made, and how meeting that author in person and seeing them talk in person changed my viewpoint. So I think that's just an interesting thing to consider in general when I come to fiction, because the art and the author are two separate entities, and once they put something out, it's also the readers. So I think that's a whole other discussion. So I'm just going to leave that answer there. But the next question is, did you ever read any book by Neil Gaiman? And the answer is yes. I've read American Gods and I've read Stardust. I don't know if I've read any others. I'd have to look up his not his discography, that's for music, but I know that he's written Doctor Who episodes and I've watched a ton of Doctor Who in like the earlier era, like 9, 10 and 11, and I'm pretty sure he wrote some of those episodes. So I've kind of accidentally consumed his content as a screen format, and then I've read 2 of his books. So he's just not really the author for me, unfortunately. The next question is, do you eat snacks while reading, and what is your go-to favorite snack? I try not to eat while I'm reading because it detracts my attention span, but if I had to pick a favorite snack in general, I would probably pick cake and biscuits because I'm a huge sweet tooth. And sometimes I do drink a cup of tea when I read, but I try not to because if I'm reading, I want to focus on reading, not consuming other stuff at the same time. The next question is, have you ever heard of the Culture series? And that's with a capital C. I have not. Oh, I've seen the covers though. Ian M. Banks. It's a utopian post-scarcity space society of humanoids, aliens, and advanced AI. That sounds like it will be up my alley actually, so thank you for the recommendation. The next question is, did you know that you ruined me when I started to read Sanderson's books with your guide to the Cosmere? Gosh, this man needs to chill. There are a lot of books. But yay, I'm so happy that I got someone into reading Sanderson, because that's kind of the channel goal here. Yeah, he does have a lot. I really can't fault that statement, to be honest. But his website is also great. He's got a ton of resources on there. So if you watch my guide and you've seen the list in the description and you still don't know what to read, then just look at his website, because he's got a decent breakdown of it too. My top 3 favorite authors. That is hard. Okay. It's hard because I have a favorite book, The Art of Racing in the Rain, but then I tried reading something else by him and I just DNF'd it. I didn't like it. And then when it comes to like J. Kristoff, I loved his Nevernight series, kind of enjoyed the Lifelike series. I know the last one's coming out soon. And I also really loved Amy Kaufman and J. Kristoff's Illuminae Files and Aurora Rising. But there are books by both of those authors, Amy and Jay, respectively, that I haven't really liked. I did read Storm Dancer. I just gave it a 3 stars. And then I read These Broken Stars by Amy Kaufman, gave it about a 3 as well. So I don't know if I can pick those, even though they've written series that I love. Somebody that I've consistently given a high rating to though is Becky Chambers. I loved her Wayfarers series. I loved her To Be Taught Fortunate novella. So I think she would be up there as one of my favorites potentially. Brandon Sanderson, obviously, I feel like that's a no-brainer. See, I want to say Brent Weeks to throw something a little bit different in there, because he wrote the Lightbringer series, which I loved, but he also wrote the Night Angel series, and that is a book series that I tried to read years ago, and I don't know what it was. I think it was his style of writing, but I think because of the different story of Lightbringer, combined with the fact that Brent Weeks' writing had grown, that's why I liked Lightbringer so much. So I don't know, I feel like I can't choose him. Oh duh, I've got a huge one staring me right in the face, Robin Hobb. Why did it take me so long to reach that conclusion? Anyway, moving on. What is your favorite magic system you read? So many. Lightbringer, maybe? Because that is a very intricate magic system about color and transmuting color into tangible formats so that you can use it for functions in your daily society. But if you overuse the magic in the world, then it depletes your lifespan. So that's a really interesting one. I do prefer my magic systems to have rules, because that way the character seems to know what they're doing with it. But then later on, if there's a twist in the story that is like, by the way, this is about the magic system that has rules, but there's this little thing you didn't know about, and that changes your entire understanding of the magic. It's like an iceberg thing, right? Knowing a little bit of it and thinking you know everything, and then there being a secret little part of it that's like, I got you, it's a plot twist. If I answered the question, Warbreaker has a really cool magic system as well. It is color based as well, like in Lightbringer, but it does it in a different way. So there's 1 breath per person, and I think per object, and you can strip the breath from people and objects and become more powerful. And when you do that, it strips the color from things. I think I'm remembering that right. So Lightbringer and Warbreaker are 2 excellent ones. Obviously, I'm bypassing Stormlight and Mistborn for obvious reasons, because I feel like they're glaringly obvious. The next question is, what class was your favorite, like class at school or uni when you were studying, and do you have a favorite essay that you wrote? I wrote an essay at uni, and it was actually about The Great Gatsby, and I thought that I did a really good essay. And then when I got my results for that unit texted to me, because that was an option you were able to have, I got the results back and I failed. And then I freaked out and I emailed my coordinator of that entire unit, the chair of the unit, and they were like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't put your marks into the system. You actually got one of the top 5 marks overall in this class. And over a couple of hundred people to get top marks, that was like pat on the back worthy. And then when I was at high school, which is when I was like 13 to 17, 18, I don't think I wrote any essay that was particularly interesting then, but my favorite subject was English at the time. I liked literary studies, but I think it was the teachers that really make the classes, because I hate maths, but I had an amazing math teacher at one point in my later high school years, and she made math actually understandable to me, which is like, power to her. I hope she's still teaching, because that's just a feat of almost impossibility, to be honest. So we're moving right into the next question, which is, how did you get into reading fantasy? Who or what has inspired you to try this genre? I made a video about my reading journey recently, so I'll link that somewhere. I never know which end to point to, but one of the books that I picked up initially was The Name of the Wind, and that was on my best friend's recommendation. And this has a magic system in it that is both one, explained, and then there's a section of magic that you don't have any rules for. So because Patrick Rothfuss navigated both areas of having an explained magic system and a mysterious one, I think I liked the fact that it was structured in a way that kept me guessing. Name of the Wind is one that definitely tipped me into reading fantasy, but Harry Potter was like early on. When I was 11 or 12, I read that, and that's urban fantasy, isn't it? Because Harry is in our world. Well, I mean, he's in London, and then he gets on a train and goes to a magical school. So urban fantasy, if that counts. And then Name of the Wind. And also my friend Ricky lent me all of the Robin Hobb books when I was in high school, because he read them first and he wanted a friend to talk to them about with. So I read Robin Hobb when I was like 15 or 16, I reckon. And obviously up until the most recent book came out, which was like 2017. The next question is, what is my favorite childhood book? And again, I'll link that video in the description. Do I want to say Twilight? I know Twilight cops a lot of flack, but Twilight was the thing that got me into reading a lot more YA. Like, I was already a reader. I was reading a lot already, but Twilight was the thing that made more people around me read, and that opened my horizons and helped me figure out which friends to borrow books from, and it made me go to the library more. And I think my romanticized memory is probably going to be better than the actual reading experience now of what Twilight is, just because I've been spoiled for a lot of YA and a lot of books now. So I very much know my tastes now, but when it was early on, I was still kind of discovering things. So I want to say Twilight, but that said, I'm probably never going to reread it again. The next question is, have you always loved reading, and if not, when did you start? Started when I was like 10 or 11, same age as Harry and Harry Potter, because my mum said that she was not reading the books fast enough for me and I wanted to know what happened, so I started to pick them up myself. The next question is, if you could recommend just one adult fantasy book and one sci-fi adult book, which ones would they be? It really depends on your reading taste, so I hesitate to recommend just one and one. I'm going to try and pick stuff that I haven't recommended too much, because I feel like if I don't look on my Goodreads, I'm going to just default to like a Brandon Sanderson book, Name of the Wind, Becky Chambers, which are like my top tier recommendations usually. Oh, there's a book that I don't really talk about very much, but it kind of lives on the bookshelf in the other room. Sometimes I switch it out when I film different videos, but it's We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson, and that is a sci-fi element to the story, but it's mostly like a diverse contemporary book about a boy named Henry, and he gets periodically abducted by aliens, and he has a choice of whether or not to press this red button, and that red button will end the world as we know it, and he has to decide whether we are worth saving. So I think that's an interesting moral question, as well as a little bit of a sci-fi flair. It's not like hard sci-fi of, you know, spaceships and stuff, but it's an interesting one to consider. And now for a fantasy, I'm not really sure. I don't talk about it very much, and that's because I kind of like petered off with the later part of the series. It kind of went out with a sizzle instead of a bang for me. But the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard, I remember loving this. I read the first book in like 2015, and that was just after I'd finished writing a literary thesis that was very analytical and very brain draining. So the fact that I could pick up a YA and it fit into the tropes that I expected it to fit in, and then it also had minute little subversions to it as well that surprised me. I was like, 5 stars, god tier. And it's about a girl named Mare, and she's a red blood, and she lives in a world of red and silver bloods. Silver are the higher class, red's the working class. And all of the silver bloods seem to have like X-Men like powers. And one day Mare ends up having potential powers as well. So it's about the power dynamic, it's about rebellion, and it's about a little bit of political maneuvering in royalty and stuff. So it was like sitting down in a theatre and watching an action movie on screen. So that's why I'm going to recommend Red Queen, but the rest of the books got lesser ratings as I went on. So if you're going to pick up the series, I hope you like it, but I didn't love the ending. Just so you know, do you love reading dictionaries or encyclopedias? Because I love reading those books. Not usually what I would choose, but I do remember flicking through the dictionary when I was little and playing word games with my friends, so maybe that counts. What was your first Sanderson book, and when did you realize you were hooked? I found Sanderson by joining Bookstagram. So I joined Bookstagram in 2015 around the same time I was writing my thesis for honours, because I just needed something to look at that was pretty. So I ended up finding Brandon Sanderson on Bookstagram, bought a bunch of his books, didn't end up reading them for ages, and then Dave, my partner, read The Way of Kings, and he was like, you need to read this book now. So after my thesis, I read The Way of Kings, and then the rest is history. So I started at a place that is probably not recommended to start, just because The Way of Kings is so dense, but I loved it because it was dense. So it really depends on what kind of reader you are. The next question is, what's one book that you can relate to a lot? I'm not sure if there's like one specific book that I relate to. I think it's more that I relate to different themes, and that's what I seek out in books themselves. So obviously the found family trope, I have a wonderful close-knit group of friends that is like our friend family. So I think I seem to replicate that in my imagination, and it's the content that I want to consume. Plus, I think I just love the going through a doorway into a magical world trope, because when I was like 11, I wanted a Hogwarts letter, and I'm definitely not alone in that. The next question is there a book you regret reading? If yes, what was it and why? Yes, and I would have to say The Painted Man. It's called The Warded Man, I think, in the US. It has a variation on titles, but it's by Peter V. Brett. The apocalyptic part of the story, amazing. The demon part of the story, amazing. The character development, I can't really speak to very much because I kept getting distracted by things in the plot that I didn't love, and that was the fact that every woman in the story had to be sexually assaulted or raped in order to be developed, and I found that quite demeaning in a way. Apparently later on in the books it gets better and it changes, but I did not want to continue past the first book because obviously I like to see all genders in a book represented in a way that makes them strong and vulnerable and well-rounded, and you don't have to have somebody recovering from trauma to develop them all the time. They can have other things like, you know, the apocalypse with demons to develop them as a form of trauma rather than sexual assault as a form of trauma. Anyway, I don't want to go on a tangent about that book because I know that people will love it for different reasons, so I don't want to hang crap on it all the time, because if people did that about my favourite books all the time, it would make me sad. The next question is, if you had the power to change the future, would you? Aren't we changing the future every day for ourselves? The next question is, what was the very first romance book you ever read? Man, I don't really read romance, and if I do, it's usually a subplot to something else. I did read It Sounded Better in My Head by Nina Kenwood, and that was a self-identity exploratory book, but it was also a romance book, I guess. So I think that might count, but I only read that this year. I do want to read Red, White and Royal Blue. I've heard incredible hype about that book. The next question is, what book on your shelves means the most to you? Can be because of the effect the book had on you, but I mean more sentimental reasons to the physical book itself. Oh, so many have so many different reasons. There is a book, and it's actually an advanced reading copy, which is the book that gets sent out for like publicity purposes before the actual publication of the book, and that goes out to like reviewers and media and all that kind of thing. But Nevernight was the huge thing. I was absolutely obsessed with it. I was trying to tweet and find someone to trade with on Twitter because I wanted this proof version of a book that was really hard to find, and Jay must have noticed the fact that I kept tweeting, even though I didn't, you know, mention him or tag him or anything. It's not really any of his problem, but he noticed it and he was like, yo, I have a spare one, and so he sent it to me. I'm just super grateful that he actually noticed and took the time to make a fan of his happy. So that is one of them. The other one is The Bands of Mourning, which is a Brandon Sanderson book. So Dave actually borrowed this book from me like ages ago, and initially I'd won it and it was a signed copy, and he accidentally left it on a bus in Sydney when he was up there doing a job, and he was just so tired from the job that he left it on the seat next to him and got off the bus. Of course I was devastated, but he ended up figuring something out and getting in touch with Brandon Sanderson's team and some other fans of Brandon Sanderson, and they helped him get a signed book by Brandon sent to me that arrived on my birthday. I mean, he couldn't control the birthday part, but he could control and figure out the rest. So I'm just lucky that he got another copy sent to me that was also signed and personalized, which was more than the first book was. The next question is, what book would you like most to see adapted for television or film? I mean, I would say Percy Jackson, but we just got that announcement that it's coming to Disney+. So the other option that I would probably like to see is actually surprisingly Red Rising, maybe, just because it's obviously set on Mars. It's got such a sci-fi twist to the series, so all of the stuff that they do in live action would have to be made in CG and like compositing and stuff. So I imagine that would be really hard to make. Not that an animation would be less difficult, but I think it would just be easier to have a vision in your mind and be able to draw it rather than create it and make it look real. The next question is, what is your most anticipated release this year? And I have to say Rhythm of War, the next Stormlight book, but also I would say Empire of the Vampire, but I think that got pushed back, and that's by Jay Kristoff. But then there is Hank Green's new book coming out in July, and then there's a book by N.K. Jemisin, The City We Became, and that is literally just arrived in the mail. It's in the other room on the bed, and I'm so hyped up to read that book because I love the 5th season. I'd also want to include the next Bone Season book by Samantha Shannon, but that also got pushed back. So I think coronavirus is having a really huge impact on publishing and the books that we're expecting to come to us sooner rather than later. But if it's going to be an excellent book, I'm happy to wait for it because, you know, TBR's not getting much shorter, to be honest. The next question is, what is the best book you've read since starting BookTube? Ooh, the 5th season probably, because I didn't expect that to be as good as it was. It's like an apocalyptic fantasy book, and it's very, very diverse as well, which is pretty cool. What kind of music do you enjoy? Do you ever listen to music while reading? I do not listen to music while reading. If I hear noise while I'm reading, I get very distracted, so I often put on my noise cancelling headphones and put on a rain soundtrack to read books because it can get very noisy where I live. The next question is, what's the best thing about working in publishing? If you didn't know, I worked for one of the big 5 publishers a couple of years ago in a couple of different roles, and I ended up leaving for various reasons. But the best thing that I found when I was there is just the people. In an office, you're going to have small talk. It's inevitable. But when you're in publishing, that small talk is like, what book are you reading? What are you loving at the moment? And I just love that people in publishing can connect with book small talk, because books are like my life. So I love that I can connect that way with other people. The next question is, I'd love to to know your top 5 fantasy reads to convince non-fantasy readers to read fantasy. I don't know why that was like a tongue twister, but for my brain. And then the next part of that question is, have you ever considered drawing fan art of your favorite reads? Yes, I have considered drawing fan art, but I also don't know how to digital draw. So that is something that I want to work on, and I want to get a drawing tablet and stuff. And then for the first part of that question, the top 5 fantasy reads, I actually made a video that was like adult fantasy for YA readers. So that kind of answers the question a little bit. But if I had to choose fantasy reads to convince non-readers, because that's a little bit of a different twist to what that video I made was, I'd probably pick Red Queen because it's a good mixture of stuff that we already know from like pop culture movies, X-Men Powers, Rebellion. I'd also pick Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell because it doesn't have like a pronounced magic system in it, but it's got a character voice that I think is quite personable and is easy to connect with. The Final Empire would be another one, and I know I'm recommending Brandon Sanderson a lot, but Brandon's writing is really palatable and quite easy to get into. Obviously, I'd recommend Percy Jackson as well because it has really cool mythology in it. It does read a little bit younger, but it's a book that got me into reading more fantasy for sure. And then the last one, probably, it's like urban fantasy, so it's not like direct fantasy, but it is This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab, and that is a story that has kind of like X-Men abilities in it as well. So it's about these two characters, they're at uni and their thesis is that people can have extraordinary powers, and so they do testing that involves dying in near-death experiences in order to get these powers, and then you flash forward in the future and they are mortal enemies and you don't know what happened. So that's an interesting one to pick up as well because it's set in our time, so it's got stuff in the world that's relatable, so you don't have to learn an entire world building system, but it's got fantastical elements in it as well that are woven in quite well. The next one is, what is your reading snack of choice? Cookies! Always cookies. The next question is, how do you organize the shelves behind you? And I mean, they're not behind me now, but in that room, because it's Dave's bookshelf, it's only like 2 lines that you see behind me. I just organize it with whatever books I've brought over to Dave's house. And then when it comes to my bookshelf, that is organized by favorite author and roughly genre, and then roughly color for the aesthetic within each author and genre, because I don't want it to look like too haphazard. So if it's organized a little bit by color, that makes it look semi-organized, but it's very cluttered at the moment. I really need to get my own place so that I can have like an entire wall of bookshelf. The next question is, I started using Audible and came across the stats section where you can see your timeline tallies, or time tallies rather. I'd love to know your total listening time on Audible. Let's find out together. My total amount of listening time is 1 month, 14 days, 4 hours and 15 minutes. The next question is, what is your favorite book? The Art of Racing in the Rain, Name of the Wind, Assassin's Apprentice, Stormlight Archive. No, that's a whole series. I'm panicking. I need to stop listing them. What is your preferred way to read? Physical books or ebooks? I barely read ebooks. I've borrowed 1 or 2 from my library and I found that having them on my phone helps motivate me to read, but I don't usually borrow ebooks. I've probably read like 2 in my entire life. So I'd say physical books are the way to go. I've read mostly physical books. Obviously, because of my Audible stats in the previous question, I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. But I more often than not borrow the audiobooks for books that I already own, just because I know that they're on my reading pile already and I want to get the number down as much as I can. So I kind of try and multitask what I'm reading, because if I read in different formats, I can fill different parts of my day with reading. The next question is, character-driven or plot-driven book? Which one do you prefer? Honestly, if the characters don't interest me, then I don't find the plot as compelling. And that is to say, I don't love characters more than plot. I think they have to work in a very good balance for me to care about both ends. So I do love a good plot book, but I also need to at least kind of empathize and understand my character that I'm reading from to care about the plot as well. So, that might have been a cop-out answer, but probably character more than plot, because Becky Chambers at least doesn't have like a huge detailed plot in her books, but her characters are really quiet and really informed, and so I love her character work and I love her books, so the plot just happens in the background. The next question is, what are your favorite book covers? There are lots of book covers that have questionable proportions and stuff, and I'm quite sick of the way that stuff gets marketed because it all kind of looks the same to fit the genre, and I want a little bit of a break from that, but I do like more illustrated covers, so that's why I really like the Spellslinger books. I know they're favorites of mine in general because of the content, but the cover is what made me pick up the series to start with. So got a good cover, I'm probably going to pick up the book. Also, a new one that I was recommended on a video a little while ago was a book by TJ Klune. I can't remember. It's something Cerulean Sea, but I'll put it on the screen. It has a beautiful color palette, so that is definitely on my radar. I'll probably borrow it from my library. Are you writing anything at the moment? I should be. Yes, I want to write something, but I'm not writing it at the moment. I've only just finished my online course course. So I now have more time to dedicate to writing, at least I hope so. Have you ever thought about using SM Zeus to promote your videos? I have no idea what that is. What is your weirdest reading habit? I tend to use a bookmark out of anything I can reach. Sometimes I've used another book as a bookmark, like the book will be open and then I'll put another book in it and close it, and that'll be my bookmark. I've used hair ties, I've used clean tissues, I've used my phone, I've used a sock, like I use ridiculous things as bookmarks. And I have a whole mug of bookmarks, so it doesn't make any sense. The next question is, can you tell us which publisher you work or worked for and what your duties involved? Yes, I worked for Penguin Books Australia for a little while. I worked in a couple of different places. So initially I was like an admin person, and the way that the publisher worked that I worked for at the time, I don't know if things have changed now because I've been out of that publishing job for a couple of years. So there very well could have been changes that I'm no longer aware of, but the publisher had clients, and that meant that they distributed a ton of books because they had a warehouse. So they didn't just distribute Penguin books, they distributed books from different publishers. And so those publishers needed to know about their stock, and they needed to know about their orders and all of that kind of thing. So that's what I was on the team for, doing admin for. So I was talking to those publishers as clients, and I was talking to the IT department, and I was talking to the warehouse staff that were located in a separate location. So I was like the middle point for all the communication. And then after that I worked in adult publicity for a while, but it wasn't really for me. It involved a lot of stuff that I didn't realize going into publicity. So I want to work in like publishing or editorial. Oh, my nose is starting to get itchy. It's so warm in this room. Okay. Would you rather have pineapples for hands or eat only pineapples for the rest of your life? Oh my God, this is too much of a decision for me to make. Can I put stuff on the pineapples that I'll eat? Because if I had to eat them alongside every meal, I don't know. I don't want pineapples for hands. I like my dexterity too much. I'm probably just gonna eat them for the rest of my life. If you could, which fantasy world would you like to live in or visit? So many of them have war and rebellion and many people dying all the time. Maybe the Name of the Wind, because that had a cool magical university that I'd like to go to. But I feel like that's a cop-out, just like saying Hogwarts from Harry Potter. I really like the concept of the Chronicles of Narnia going through a wardrobe, but then coming back and me having aged in that world and then not in this world is kind of messed up. Ooh, maybe Every Heart a Doorway, because that's what that school exists for. Kids who have gone through their doors and then come back to reality. I'm trying to think of some more, but honestly I can't, because all of them are dark and all of them have death and stuff, and I don't even want to be a background character because there's still risk, you know? So I'm probably gonna have to stick with those ones that I said. Next question is, what are your auto-buy authors? Brandon Sanderson, Becky Chambers, Samantha Shannon, Jay Kristoff, Amy Kaufman, Rick Riordan. Is that all? I feel like I've missed one. Oh, Joe Abercrombie as well. And probably Brent Weeks, but all his newer stuff. What is one thing you'd love to do on your channel? Not have an itchy nose. I'd like to do more collaborations, but given coronavirus at the moment, I had some lined up to do that were organized with friends, but that obviously had to be put on hold because I can't really leave the house and neither can they, and we need to be in the same room for it to work. And I'd also like to do more reviews because I just find them really hard to prepare for. Like a lot of videos now, I can just sit down and have like a rough idea of what I want them to be, and then that's what will come out. But with reviews, I've got to full on write an entire review before I can sit down and film. So it just takes more effort, and that's why I keep not filming reviews. Also, they don't get very many views, so if I did film them, they'd have to be an extra video, and that's just a little bit more work than normal. And then the final question, because my nose is driving me absolutely nuts, but it's the last question, so it's okay. What book would you recommend to someone who hasn't read adult fantasy but wants to try? The Black Prism, The Final Empire, Traitor's Blade. Go wild. And there you go. That is it for my Q&A. Again, I've linked the winner in the comments, so I've pinned that comment. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye.